Today we're talking about greatest hits cases. You know, we're not gonna go through the entirety of like every greatest hits case that's ever been invented. Actually, you know what, why don't we do it? Why don't we go through almost every greatest hits cases that has ever been invented? You know, I don't have all of them here because I actually went through and liquidated every greatest hits copy that I reasonably could for my collection. Like, there were some, like this game, for example, where it's like, okay, this is a nostalgic one where it was a gift to both me and my brother that Christmas, so I would never get rid of this one specifically. But then there's some other ones where it's like, alright, dude, this copy of Demon's Souls, I love Demon's Souls, but I don't love this copy of Demon's Souls. I'm gonna replace it at some point. There's a lot of quirks and funny things that also come along with some of these greatest hits cases that we'll get into, but why don't we go ahead and start from the kind of the beginning, right? Like, this was sort of the beginning of the greatest hits cases for video games. On the PlayStation 1 here, you know, it's honestly, if I'm gonna be honest, I actually have a great bit of nostalgia for these cases, so... You know, despite the fact that clearly I have a lot of disdain for these greatest hits cases, the PlayStation 1 has always been one where I'm like, alright, you know what, I can kind of live with it just because I have some nostalgia for it, but at the same time, I'm not going to go out of my way to buy a greatest hits case. You know, I can understand if a collector's looking at this and they're like, alright, you know, the green on the side and all that is just like... Ooh, I don't know, man. But again, it's weird because, like, out of all the greatest hits cases, and no matter how much I hate them, the PS1 is the one where it's like, alright, there's some sort of nostalgic joy there just because, you know, I've been playing, you know, I've had greatest hits copies since I was a kid. But at the same time, let me go grab a normal, you know, PS1 game real quick. You know what, just for the fun of it, I'll grab the Game of Life, you know, just look at it. Even for a game like this, you know, something's a bit more goofy, a bit more out there, a board game is a video game. You know, it's just, it looks so clean with the black on the side, then you flip it over, you got that there, and it's just like all black, and it looks really nice on the shelf. You know, I think it's just because normally on the side of PlayStation 1 cases, it's normally all black, so having a bit of color there, whereas for, you know, like other cases, which, you know, this is another bad example, because I hate PS2 greatest hits cases, but, you know, you at least have something there on the side, some sort of logo, which you would normally have with a normal PS2 case anyway, but... You know what I'm saying? This is just one of those cases where it's like, you know, it doesn't even say like PS1 or PlayStation on the side. It just has the name of the thing like you would see on a normal CD, whereas here, you at least see greatest hits, which gives you a bit of an indication as to like, hey, you know, this is for the PS1, but... At the same time, between the two of them, while I do have some sort of nostalgic attachment to some of these greatest hits cases, so I don't mind them as much in the case of the PS1, I'm going with the black label 10 out of 10 times out of the week. Scratch that. 11 out of 10 times. And then we move up to the PlayStation. You know what? I did a really bad job here of just grabbing greatest hits cases. Let me go grab normal cases for all of these games as well, so we have a bit of a comparison to look to as to how these games should look. Alright, I have all the English failing me. I have all the example cases. So let's take a look at the PS2 greatest hits next. This one is another one where it's like, well, yeah, I do have some kind of nostalgic attachment to the greatest hit. No. If you're gonna buy a PlayStation 2, oh yeah, but now that's a PlayStation 2 game, baby, with the black on the, oh, it looks so good. Like, how do you go from the, oh, just so beautiful to... Huh? And it's one of those things where it's like, if you're not a video game collector, or if you just care about having the games, period, that is okay. I'm not dissing you or your collecting habits. There are some people that only collect, like, greatest hits games, and honestly, like, that is completely okay. I don't judge anybody else for what they do, you know? Like, if you wanna go out and buy all the greatest hits games, that's okay. Like, they exist for a certain reason, and more times than not, a lot of those versions are actually gonna be cheaper because, well, that's the point of greatest hits, right? They're basically cheaper reprints of the game where they'll do things in order to cut costs. So when you open up like a greatest hits manual, for example, more times than not, oh, wow, this is a really rare example where the inside is actually colored. Most times when it comes to these greatest hits cases, though, they're, you know, like the manuals are going to be black and white. There might be some differences on the inside of the case. Like, more times than not, a lot of these greatest hits cases came in the later PlayStation 2 cases where I can actually go ahead and grab one for you guys. Gotta run back to the other side of my room again. Just give me one sec. Perfect example. So this is a later PlayStation 2 release. This didn't release until 2008. So yeah, this was after the PlayStation 3 release, and basically, you know, shortly after the PS3 release, they started releasing them in these cases. The main difference between the original PS2 cases and the later ones are the fact that there's going to be just like a PlayStation logo at the top, there's not going to be a memory card holder, and that's basically that. But man, let me just take a minute to revel in my copy of Lego Batman. This is one of my top 5 favorite video games of all time. I always love the manual for this game, looks so good. This is my original copy from 2008, by the way, so I've had this baby for over 16 years and it's still in basically phenomenal condition. So you're gonna see a lot of greatest hits games that come in a case like that, but there was a good handful of them that were printed early enough to where they're gonna be in these original cases here. And I just noticed that my copy of Gran Turismo 3 is a little security thing in there, I don't know. But yeah, this is another game where I do plan to replace this at some point down the line, you know. For now, it's one of those things where if I have a greatest hits game or a player's choice game or whatever, I will hold on to it for now until I can liquidate it and sell it to somebody that's willing to buy it, you know what I mean? But I also wait until I have a Black Label copy of the game. So I'll make sure that I have the Black Label copy of Gran Turismo 3 in my collection before I sell this off. Like, for example, I don't have a example for the original Xbox here, because that's one thing we can show off right now is like original Xbox, like my copy of Halo. I did at one point have one the Platinum Hits game, because that's what it's called on Xbox. I did have one Platinum Hits game, and honestly for Xbox, they don't look as bad, but they're still, it's basically just this, except it's replaced with silver. It'll say like Platinum Hits at the top, and while it's not as bad, again, it's just me from a collector's perspective, and not even just so much as like, oh, as a collector, I need Black Labels, because that's not even what it is. Like, if the Platinum Hits copies still look the exact same on the spines, and on the fronts as well for the most part, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I'd leave them on my shelf. I don't care if it's the first print or the Platinum Hits one or whatever. Like, if it looked basically the exact same, I wouldn't care. But it's just the fact that the spines always look so different and the fronts look so different, and in some cases that we'll get to a little later on with like the Xbox 360, it's just like, where'd the cover art go? Can I have some cover art with my gray box of nothing, please? But like, when I'm looking at my shelf and I see all my beautiful PS2 games lined up, and then I see just like that one greatest hits copy just sticking out like a red pimple, or in the case of the PS1, a green pimple, or a silver pimple in the case of the Xbox 360, or even worse cases with the default Calibri whatever font. Like, yeah, you know, it just gets to that point where it's like, alright, you know, I would rather just have all of them there. And, you know, nobody can knock me for this, because this is just my opinion. It's my money. I spend my money how I want. I display my collection how I want. I collect my games and keep my games and play my games how I want. If you like greatest hits, that is okay. If you want to buy and collect greatest hits, that is okay. If you want and like nothing but greatest hits, that is okay. That is your habits. These are my habits. You cannot judge me for that, just like I will not judge you for your habits. Thank you. I just say this because people get so uptight about that stuff. It's like, yeah, you know, some people are okay with buying either of them, and to a certain extent, I can be if they're not too intrusive, but the fact of the matter is there isn't a single version of greatest hits or player's choice out there where it's not intrusive enough to be like, okay, this is kind of taken away from the aesthetic of the box art or the case in some way, so I always just go with the default Black Label. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. That's my choice. Or as Nintendo would say, it's the player's choice. Not that their player's choice things would actually be my choice. I'd always go with the first print run, but still, it's the player's choice. Next up, we'll move on to the PS3, and I can't even look at it. I'm actually tearing up. Like, how did they do that? Okay, so here. One of my top 5 favorite games of all time, The Last of Us. An amazing game that still makes me cry like a little baby every time I turn it on and play it, between the intro, everything that happens throughout the game, up to the ending, man. The ending to this game is one of those endings where don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it for you if you've never played the game before, but I just sat there staring at the screen with my jaw dropped as the credits rolled, feeling emptier than I ever have before. The Last of Us Part 1 and 2 messed me up, man. Those are some of my top 5 favorite games of all time. Love these games so much. And look at the PS3. You know what? I need to go grab another PS3 case, because the PS3 cases, I think I need to devote an entire video just to talking about the history of PlayStation 3 cases, because there's a lot to talk about. So unfortunately, I don't have one of the Blue Label PS3 cases yet, but I'm gonna be ordering one later today, because I found one on eBay, and yeah, it was going for a good price, and I was like, hey, it's one of those things where, despite the fact that I just said that I only want Black Labels, those Blue Label PS3 cases are cool enough, distinct enough, and have enough cool history of them to where it's like, I want to get that, plus it's a game I've really been wanting, so I'm not going to spoil it, because we'll go over that in my next video game pickups video, which will be coming up within the next couple, however many, whatevers. But anyway, yeah, you know, this was the original PS3 case where it has, like, the Spider-Man font down the side, and then on the side, you know, it has, like, a little red thing at the top. It's not too intrusive, like, this pimple right here, it's literally just, that's how the default PlayStation 3 cases were. And again, you know, you got the nice Spider-Man font thing going down the side of there, and overall, I actually always really liked how this looked. The cases themselves are also a bit different. So you have PlayStation 3 and the Spider-Man font going across the top of the Blu-ray disc thing there, whereas over here on this one, it just has the Blu-ray disc label up at the top. And again, since there was two different things throughout its life cycle, I don't mind, because they both look similar enough. Well, I actually, no, they do look quite different. But it's just one of those things where it's like, hey, this is where the PS3 was at this time, and that's where it was at this time. And on the shelf, I mean, they still look great together. So, you know what? I'm fine with that. But then, well, what are we doing here, dude? This red case completely spits in the face of the design, language, and artistic direction of the Demon's Souls cover art. You have this very nice white, bluish, grayish kind of color scheme going on here, trying to set a very melancholic, maybe somewhat depressing vibe. And then all around it, I will say though, I did get a good price on this game, and that is another benefit of getting Greatest Hits game, is that if you go for a Black Label copy of a game, even if it's something that goes for a bit less money, like usually the LEGO games on any console or tend to be a bit cheaper, even getting a brand new sealed copy of that might be a bit more. But if you're buying PS3 games nowadays and you're okay with buying brand new versions of games, that, you know, if they're Greatest Hits, you can get Greatest Hits games brand new and sealed for relatively cheap. I bought this like only like a year or two. No, it was more like 2-3 years ago, something like that. But I got it like brand new for like $15, 15 to 20, something like that. And for like a brand new PS3 game in the 2020s, that's pretty good. So I'm not mad with the price that I paid for this game. I'm not mad at the game itself. This is one of my favorite games of all time. I love Demon's Souls. Between Dark Souls 1 and Demon's Souls, these are my top two favorite Souls games. I just love them so much. I just feel like they really capture the essence of what I enjoy about Souls games, between the vibes and the combat and everything like that. I love Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and Bloodborne. Obviously, they're fantastic masterpiece games. It's just there's something about the vibes and the slower, kind of more dreadful atmosphere of these first two Souls games where it's like, that's what I don't know, just something about that just really draws me in. But anyway, yeah, going back to actually talking about the cases themselves, this red pit, like when you have this on a shelf right beside that, it's like, it sticks out so bad. Like, even here on video, it probably doesn't actually show up as well, but when it's actually on the shelf, you don't even understand. I have like 4 Greatest Hits PS3 games in my collection, and the rest are all like normal Black Labels, whether that be the older first one with the Spider-Man font or the later ones that came with like, you know, like up at the top here. And yeah, they stick out so bad, and they honestly do look pretty terrible. Like, it just clashes with so many games. There's a few exceptions, you know, where like maybe the game's cover art itself was already red. So say if you have like a Spider-Man game or like the Deadpool game, red would actually kind of fit that. But even in those scenarios, I'd still rather just have the original cases. So I'm just ready to move. You guys ready to move on? I don't want to talk about those anymore. Thankfully, PS5 does not have Greatest Hits cases yet, so we're at the end of the PlayStation Greatest Hits things here after we talk about the PS4. So once again, we have Sekiro. You know, it looks absolutely beautiful in its original blue case. It looks absolutely fantastic, an absolute masterpiece of a game. I mean, it's Sekiro. Like, we all love this game. We all know this game. It's absolutely fantastic, and it looks great in this case. And then you have another masterpiece of a game, Persona 5. Man, let me tell you something about Persona 5. This is one of the best RPGs that has ever been made. It is an absolutely... It is a masterpiece. Like, it's literally like the Mona Lisa. You know what I mean? Like, it's a one-of-a-kind, beautiful thing. It deserves to be framed, hung up in a museum. It is an absolutely wonderful game until you put it in this case. And it's just, there's so many things wrong here. See, in a normal PlayStation case, things would be a bit more cohesive. I know with Persona 5, this may be a bit of a bad example considering the fact that the main design language and color of Persona 5 is red compared to the other games where like yellow was for 4 and blue was for 3, for example. But still, man, when you're looking at this, you got the red, which goes with it, but then the blue, and then the red. So you could maybe say, hey, this is actually the PS4's main color scheme fault for, you know, being blue or whatever. But it just, I don't know. Again, I'd argue that maybe this side of the case actually looks better in this example, because that's another thing with Greatest Hits copies on PS4. Every spine becomes red. So even if normally, say, like a game like Sekiro would normally be black, this would be red if it was a Greatest Hits copy. And then, like, for Persona 5 here, yeah, normally this would be black, but it's red, which, again, you could argue because of the main color scheme of Persona 5 that it's okay, but still, man, there's just so much clashing here. And if you've seen a normal blue case copy of Persona 5, it looks so much better than this one does, just because all of that is blue, and then the inside colors here are all red, and then you have this PlayStation Hits banner here. Just, it makes it look more like an advertisement rather than a piece of art, rather than the video game that it is, you know? And don't worry, this isn't my only copy of Persona 5. I actually have a blue label copy, you know, just like a traditional PlayStation 4 case copy of Persona 5 Royal, which, you know, if you're gonna play Persona 5, you can't go wrong with either vanilla or Royal, but you might as well go with Royal, because it's one of those things where you could play Persona 5 and then play Royal, which there is definitely merit in doing, but, you know, they're really long games as is, so if you're restricted on time, like basically every human being on Earth is, I'd recommend just going through Royal. Next up, we'll talk about Xbox, and we already talked about the original Xbox, where it's basically just, you know, silver on the front and whatever. You know, it's not that bad, but again, it was one of those situations where the only Platinum Hits game that I had was Medal of Honor Frontline, and I had 2 copies of it. I had a Black Label copy and a Platinum Hits copy, and I had also 2 original Xboxes. I had one in my main setup and one just sitting in my closet, just, you know, whatever. So, this last year, for my brother's birthday, I was like, hey, do you have an original Xbox yet? And he was like, no, and, you know, he's my younger brother, so as his older brother, I feel a responsibility to, you know, anytime that I can hook him up with some video games, or, you know, hit him with that blast from the past from stuff from, like, my childhood with, like, the PS2, GameCube, original Xbox, stuff like that, or even before that with, like, the PS1 and everything before, you know, I always try to hook him up and stuff like that. And since I had an extra original Xbox just kind of sitting around, I was like, hey, how about I give this to you? And I always check in with him first, because you know, there's times where sometimes I liquidate my greatest hits copies off to him because he doesn't mind. So I asked him, I was like, hey, it's a Platinum Hits copy, but do you want Medal of Honor Frontline? He was like, well, what's it about? It's like, it's a World War II shooter. He's like, oh yeah, I want that, because, you know, he's really into World War II shooters, which that's definitely something that either he got from me, or it's just something we both happen to have in comics. We both love, like, World War II shooters and stuff. So, yeah, I gave him that copy of the game, and I held on to my Black Label copy. And again, for, you know, for original Xbox, it's really not that bad, but that's for original Xbox. When we get to Xbox 360, look, Xbox 360 cases are absolutely wonderful. You have the Xbox 360 logo at the top, you have the Xbox 360 thing on the spine, and it looks great. And let me just say, this is a clean copy of Payday 2. This is the same copy I've had since the game came out, whatever year that was. Absolutely fantastic game right here. But then Xbox had a funny thing throughout this generation where they had multiple iterations of their Platinum Hits, some worse than others. There's some I can stand, there's some that make me want to carve my eyes out with a spoon. So we had the first run of Platinum Hits Xbox 360 games, which was just outright the worst. The worst of any Platinum Hits that has ever Platinum Hits did it. What were they thinking? Okay, so we have the cover art here, but can I get some cover art with my gray box of nothing? Like, okay, so the case itself, it's all like silver, gray, whatever, fitting in with the platinum, which that in itself just completely spits in the face of the green Xbox design language. Okay, then you have, you know, I mean, the top and the side, you know, that's basically the exact same until you realize that there's a bunch of mismatching colors down here. And yeah, that gray, yeah, this should normally be yellow for LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga. No, it's gray now. It's gray just like the rest of the case. And you have this Platinum Family Hits right at the top, and this little teeny tiny box for the cover art. And the rest of it, it's just all gray. Thankfully, the back is fine. The back looks phenomenal, but the rest of it, what happened? Thankfully, out of all the greatest hits, Platinum Hits, whatever, for the Xbox 360, that was the worst offender. We'll go from worst to best here. So this is the second worst offender, but a little more tolerable. And I say a little because there's one very big problem here. So we have the front. It looks basically fine. I can live with this. This is basically identical to, like, a normal Xbox 360 case. I'm fine with this. Until you turn it up. Oh, dog, what is this font? That is not how the spine in the game is supposed to look. So not only do you have the Xbox 360 Platinum Hits thing here, which goes down way farther than even the original Platinum Hits did, which this is literally just the original Xbox. I'm sorry if the brightness is throwing it off. The lighting is terrible here, but the original thing for the Platinum Hits was the exact same length as a normal 360 case, so that was fine. But this one, the Platinum Hits, if you can see it, goes down just a bit farther, and then you have the title there, which is in this, like, I don't even know what font that is. I said Calibri. I don't know what it's actually called. Arial font, whatever. It's the most default that default can get. Thankfully, we still have the PopCap logo down there, so there's some representation for the developer and publisher and such, but like, why did they keep messing up the spines? First you had the gray box, but at least the logo of the game was there, but then you have like this basic Arial font. It's like, huh? And then thankfully we have the least worst of all of them, where yes, you still have the Platinum Hits thing at the top, yes, it goes down a little bit longer, but it kept the, you know, some of the best properties of the original Platinum Hits thing, to where, yes, the spine's a little messed up, and that does still irk me in my 360 collection. But at least, you know, the rest of it is fine, so it still looks fine. But, I mean, again, if I'm gonna collect 360 games, I'm always gonna go with this, unless it's one of those situations where I'm at a garage sale and a game normally goes for like $50, $60, and I see it there for $5, $10, even $20. I will save the $40-ish and just get a Platinum Hits copy. And that is one thing worth mentioning. I'm not completely opposed to Greatest Hits copies. If I find a steal for a game's a game, it plays the same way. I'm just thankful to have the game in its physical format regardless, and there actually is some scenarios that is worth mentioning where the Greatest Hits copies can actually be the definitive versions of the games. So if you're gonna buy like Batman Arkham City on PS3, for example, there is a Game of the Year edition that does exist as a Black Label copy, but it can be a little bit harder to find that one, and the main one that's floating around, like the one you're gonna see a majority of the time, is the Greatest Hits copy, which does include all of the DLC, and the DLC is rather imperative, and I would say almost necessary for playing Batman Arkham City. Is it completely necessary to enjoy the game? Absolutely not, but there was so much content there between, you know, the actual extra Catwoman stuff in the story, to all the different like challenge maps and extra playable characters, where I feel like you're really just missing out by not getting that DLC. So there's some scenarios where I would say, okay, maybe it would be fun to pick up a Greatest Hits copy, especially because while the Game of the Year, or, you know, like the special Black Label one that does come with a DLC on disc as well, is still floating out there, it definitely isn't as common as the Greatest Hits one. Also, when you look at Devil May Cry 3 on the PS2, the Greatest Hits copy actually includes, you know, it's like a later revision of the game, has like extra content and stuff like that, so that may actually be a situation where you'd want to get the Red Label copy or the Greatest Hits copy over the original Black Label copy. But again, if I can help it, the only time that I'll really crack on that is, again, if there's a lot of substantial content or enough changes made. Like another example I think of on the PS2 is you want to get the Greatest Hits copy of Crash Wrath of Cortex rather than the Black Label copy, because the red copy is a revision of the original version where the loading screens were substantially cut down, and that was a huge complaint of the original version because it did have some rather long loading times. But with the red version, it was cut back on substantially. So, you know, if you're gonna get either the Black Label or the Red Label for Crash Wrath of Cortex, I'd recommend going with the Red Label just to save yourself literal time of your life not waiting on those loading screens. So there's very niche examples of that, but for the most part, yeah, I'm always gonna gravitate towards Black Label copies. And I just realized that that's actually all of the ones that I have in my collection, because I used to have some Wii Nintendo Selects, I used to have some Wii U Nintendo Selects. I never had any 3DS Nintendo Selects. I always just got normal 3DS games, like my copy of Mario Kart 7, for example. That's just Mario Kart 7, it's not, you know, anything else. So really making a video like this, it was actually kind of, it kind of sucks that I actually don't really buy any Greatest Hits, just because I had less examples to actually show off here. But we'll go ahead and talk about some of the other ones. I'll also be sure to like maybe toss up some pictures on screen just so you guys can kind of have a better idea of what I'm actually talking about. So we have most of the PlayStation and Xbox stuff here covered as far as like Greatest Hits and special copies and stuff like that goes. For the Xbox One, they actually did not end up, to my knowledge, doing any sort of like Greatest Hits things. You know, they were still trying to figure out how to actually make their cases look by the time the generation was ending, and even still they're constantly like switching up how their cases look there. And obviously we don't have anything for the PS5 or Series X yet, you know, because we're like basically still only like halfway through the generation, so that'll come at some point. And surprisingly, with the Nintendo Switch, we don't have any Nintendo Selects for that, which is really surprising, because at this point in the generation, you know, for the Wii, the 3DS, the Wii U, we would have seen a Nintendo Selects at this point, where again they're re-releasing the game so they can release them for cheaper, maybe boost up sales, and instead of the games going for $40 to $60, you know, because the Nintendo games always hold their value, instead they get dropped down to like 20, or, you know, nowadays if they would do it for the Switch, I feel like they probably come in at like $30 to $40, because you even have games like Breath of the Wild or Mario Odyssey, which are still retailing for the full 60. So I feel like when Nintendo Selects, we probably only see it drop to maybe like 40, 30 at the absolute least. No way they go down to 20, just because those games still sell like hotcakes time after time. And definitely not for any of the more recent games, like the new Zelda coming out or Mario Wonder definitely wouldn't become a Nintendo Selects for a while. But like Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, those have been out for almost a decade at this point, believe it or not, which makes me feel like a fossil saying that, because it feels like just yesterday those games and the Switch itself was releasing. But, you know, games like that probably more or less would become a Nintendo Selects. But anyway, we'll go back to the history of it. So the first Nintendo console really that had Nintendo Selects or Player Selects or Player's Choice or whatever in any substantial way would have been the GameCube. And again, I don't have any Player's Choice GameCube games on hand. The only GameCube games I have are ones that are just, you know, normal copies, because especially with GameCube games are a bit more pricey. So that's one of those consoles where, you know, for a console where it's just pricier in general, I'll always be a bit more selective about what games I'm buying, and will definitely stay away from Greatest Hits games then. You know, but again, as I a collector and as somebody that kind of, like shows off some of these quirky things for videos and for content and stuff, I think I ought to pick up just some more random greatest hits copies when I get the chance, just so I have something to display for you guys, or just when we, talk about this kind of quirky random stuff, so I have example pieces on hand. And there is something novel about having these greatest and platinum hits cases and player's choice cases to where it's a part of the console's history. While sure, it's cool to have the original copies, it's also cool to see, like, hey, what was their rendition of player's choice for this console generation? What did that look like? How are they trying to give back to the players? What did that look like? So, I'm not necessarily coming around on greatest hits copies by the end of this video, because I'll always prefer the standard ones, but now that I'm thinking of it, I do want to pick some of those up just so that I can have those example pieces and at least have one game for each console where it's one of those copies, so I'd be like, hey, that's what they did for this generation to get back to the players. But anyway, getting back on track. The GameCube, a rather infamous one where it has that kind of disgusting yellow label. You're seeing the picture on your screen here. I'll try to get one that shows like the entire cover art, like the spine and the front, and yeah, I'll always prefer how the normal GameCube cases look. That one ain't it, Chief. But as far as the Wii and the Wii U goes, those ones actually aren't that bad. They're basically just like the main cover art, except there's like a bit of a banner around it. It says Nintendo Select with a nice little ribbon, which actually kind of makes it feel pristine or prestige in a way. So those are ones where it's like, I could live with it, but at the same time, I'm never going to go out of my way to get that, and especially for something like the Wii U, where it's a bit more of a niche console, and again, it's one of those situations where I love the Wii U, it's one of my favorite consoles of all time, and it's a bit more niche, there was less games released for it. I'm always just going to go for the default ones unless I get a steal of a price on a game. Like, if I find like a Nintendo Select version of Devil's Third, which never ended up releasing, but say theoretically I could find one for $20, considering how much that game normally goes for, yeah, I'd pick that up. I mean, I already have Devil's Third digitally, but, obviously I'm all about physical collecting, so if I found a Nintendo Select version for $20, but the normal version was going for the usual, like, $400 or $500 that it goes for now, yeah, I'd get the Nintendo Select version, of course. And again, as I just mentioned, the Nintendo Selects for Wii and Wii U really weren't that bad. Like, yeah, sure, it was still noticeable, but, on the side of the case, it didn't really change the look of it that much. And, even on the front, it wasn't that bad, but still, it's enough to where it's like, alright, the red banner's there, it does kind of take away from the cover art and the aesthetic, and it's kind of just makes it feel more like an advertisement for the game rather than the game itself. And there's two ways to look at it. It kind of feels like an advertisement for the game when, it's kind of hard to explain. It almost feels like an advertisement more than anything, but at the same time, it is kind of cool because it's like, hey, this game had to work its butt off to get here. It earned that greatest hits label. It sticks out on the shelf because it's meant to stick out on the shelf. It's meant to be like, hey, I earned this position here. You see that Nintendo Selects ribbon? I earned that ribbon. So maybe there's something to be said there. Again, it goes back and forth. It's just for me as a collector, my collecting habits and what I like to display on my shelf and what I like to have. And when I say display on my shelf, it's not even because like, oh, I like to show it off in videos, or oh, I like to show it off when people hang out with me. I don't have friends or family in real life. I'm literally alone 100% of the time. There's nobody that ever comes into my room. I am the only human being that has stepped foot in this room in the last however many years. And obviously, we're never like over there showing stuff off on camera all the time, so it's not even about that either. You can barely even see the bookshelf in the background, and when I'm at my other setup, you can't even see it at all. It's just, it's one of those things where I'm a collector. That's part of who I am, as a person. I'm a gamer. That's one of like the core pillars that makes me, Nathan, who I am. So, I just like having that in my room, same way that you put posters up in a room. Outside of that, surprisingly, from my knowledge, the original DS didn't actually end up having a Nintendo Selects. I don't believe any of the Game Boy consoles ever had one either, not that I've seen. But then the 3DS, we were already talking about that before. It's basically the exact same as the Wii and the Wii U. I'll make sure to toss another picture up on screen so you guys can see it, where on the side of the case, it's basically the exact same, and the only real difference is on the front with the Nintendo Selects thing. So, it's one of those situations, again, where if I find an expensive Nintendo 3DS game for cheap, where it's like the Nintendo Selects version is cheap, but the normal 3DS one is more expensive, sure, I'll jump on that if it's a really good price. But otherwise, yeah, I feel like that covers most of our bases of most of the main, like, Nintendo Selects, PlayStation hits, Platinum hits type of player's choice stuff. And, yeah, some of them are hit or miss. On the Nintendo side of things, they're relatively less egregious, aside from, like, the GameCube, for example, that yellow label, and then you got PlayStation with some of these, like we talked about before, with Demon Souls, with the red, oh, yeah, no, that red just ain't hitting, buddy. But, otherwise, it's a hit or miss type of thing, and it really comes down to you, your collecting habits, and what you're willing to get. But I don't know. It's one of those things where it's funny to get mad about it, and it's funny to look at them and get all disgusted. But at the end of the day, video games are video games. You know what I mean? And even as I admitted in this video, if it's really like a bang for buck situation where it's like, hey, it's cheapest you're gonna ever see this game, you know, you might as well just be happy to have the game in the first place, right? But on the other hand, there's some things that are so heinous that even saving some money isn't worth. But anyway, as always, a massive shout out and thank you to all the patrons and channel members. Thank you to all of you in the low baller tier, and an even bigger shout out and thank you to all of you in the big baller tier, Mellow Asking, and Big Dad Made, and the biggest shout out thank you to all of you in the G tier, Run Events, and Let's Just Go. Thank you guys so much. You guys are literal legends. I love you. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.